fast forward to yesterday or the day before, when Veritas dropped this third video from Dr. Walker, I assume now formerly Pfizer, worldwide director of mRNA vaccine or mRNA strategies, in which he talks about the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis. What he's basically saying there is that Pfizer believes that the menstrual irregularities are really kind of the tip of the iceberg, and that this thing is damaging a fundamental aspect of your endocrine system. Your endocrine system controls your energy, it controls your sex drive, it controls all kinds of development, it controls your mental state, whether you're depressed or excited or whatever. It controls your digestion. I mean, your endocrine system is hugely important, and endocrine abnormalities can be associated with cardiac problems, and they are absolutely endocrine fluctuations impact on your immune function. So now we have, in addition to the huge laundry list that we already had of potential causes, in terms of the pathophysiology for why we're seeing these immunologic suppression phenotypes, particularly the more people get jabbed. But now we have another one, which is the damage to the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis.
What's so fascinating about this, beyond the science that's obviously fascinating, is that you're sort of laying out the story of your red pilling in essence, because every step of the way here, there's some regulatory commission or some sort of censorious outlet that's kind of stopping you, or that even there you still are saying you had this belief that the FDA would stop it. So when did you realize that it sort of seemed like the entire machinery was either broken or, my words, just outright negligent?
That's a good question. As the adverse events piled up, and I'm vaccine injured. I took the jab. I took Moderna when the National Guard was deploying it here in Central Virginia. I was scheduled for a talk in France, and I knew I couldn't go if I didn't take the jab. And I had long COVID, and there was a whole lot of press that long COVID could benefit from taking the jab. We now know that's a lie, but more propaganda.
How skeptical were you? I mean, knowing that you had COVID, okay, you had long COVID, but you had done research. I mean, how skeptical were you? I get you want to go to
jab,
France, but...
So I had, number one, in good faith, I'd assumed that my colleagues that I had known for decades must have had another part of the story that we didn't cover is that Jill and I worked on this tech for over a decade in academia, at California Regional Private Research Center, at Mouse Labs, at UMaryland, and we abandoned it because we could never overcome the toxicity. And we have multiple other patents. I mean, this wall behind me is all patents. Multiple other patents for different cationic lipids, different formulations. We published the first stuff on use of cholesterol, which is in these formulations. And early on, I called up the guy at University of British Columbia, Peter Cullis, who I'd known for quite a while, who was the one that had really made the breakthroughs to enable this version that was being deployed. And I had faith that they had solved those problems that we had not been able to solve. So I was still operating, assuming that they had overcome the things that had bedeviled us for a decade.
That's a heck of a leap of faith, huh?
Oh, I think it's reasonable. I mean, you can assume that people are nefarious, or you can assume that people are generally good. and I prefer to assume that people are generally good. Although I got to say, the last 3 years, that's taken a pretty hard hit.
Yeah.
But I still approach the world with an open heart. I try hard to, and I try hard to have faith in my fellow man, and I employ the 3 strikes rule. Generally speaking, it takes 3 strikes for me to say I just don't want to deal with that person again. So yeah, I extended trust to my former colleagues, believing that they must have had the breakthrough that they asserted that they had had. And obviously, in retrospect, they had convinced themselves as a community of a number of things, such as minor modifications in the structure of the positively charged fat would lead to formulations which would target specific organ systems or tissues. And so they had published, and it was believed in the field that these modified versions, and we in my lab, we'd built hundreds of different cationic lipid compounds and tested them. At Genzyme, they tested thousands or tens of thousands when they were trying to get agents to treat cystic fibrosis. So I knew how the game was played, and the literature suggested that there'd been some kind of serendipitous magic findings that if you use this structure and you injected it, it would only go to the lymph nodes and it would stay there. And you'll recall that's what we were all told. And yet that wasn't true. It was clearly not true based on the Pfizer data package that Byron Bridle had obtained. So, when you're in, you spent your whole career working in an area. You have all these relationships with people, professional relationships. To break out of that and say, oh, all these things I thought were this way were wrong. And for me, so I not only had that on kind of a micro level in this little bubble of this technology, but I think we've all had that, those of us that are awake have had that same experience about our government, media, military, all, globalism, I knew the World Health Organization was corrupt as the day is long because I'd been there a number of times and spoken and dealt with them. But the scope of what we've been dealing with, I think for all of us, pretty much, at least I had assumed that the world was a very different place and that people acted with integrity, generally speaking. I wrote an essay about this on Substack where I talked about peeling off layers of naivete. And I'm still not sure I've peeled off all the layers of my naivete. I'm sure there's more to go, but
there's always another layer. There's always another layer. So all of this is happening, and now you're being red pilled because you're seeing it through not only colleagues, but you're seeing it through the regulatory commissions. You're seeing it through the media.
And I've experienced it myself. Okay, on jab 2, I developed hypertension to 230 systolic, and POD, narcolepsy, and restless leg, and all those at the time were not cataloged as adverse events, but we now know that they are.
So I saw you. I saw a clip of you on Twitter a few weeks ago that no longer exists, but I saw it with my own eyes. So unless it was a deep fake, I saw it. It was not from your account. It was from someone else's account. Where in essence what you were saying was, and clean this up for me if I'm getting it slightly wrong, that basically some level of the mRNA vaccine is sort of like a low-grade HIV in that it is degrading people's immune systems. It's hitting the T cells, so now other dormant viruses are now popping up. Things like shingles.
That's not a deep. I don't know that I use the reference to AIDS. Only if I did, it would be a reference to an autoimmune, an immunodeficiency syndrome.
Yes, you made a point of differentiating between HIV and AIDS.
So acquired immunodeficiency syndrome and so if you do something, you're in a state, and then something happens and you become more immunodeficient, you've acquired an immunodeficiency syndrome, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the tie-in. AIDS is actually a big basket into which you can throw all kinds of things. Early on, it just as the clinical trials were still progressing, and then at the very earliest time when they started deploying this, it became clear that there was two in particular that were popping up that my buddies at the FDA, who were outside of the review branch, that I was having weekly Zooms with, said were being flagged, and I was hearing it popping up from other physicians. One was myocarditis, which the FDA and the CDC denied, and the Israelis denied. That's a story, and how that finally became public. And the other one was reactivation of latent DNA viruses, shingles being a notable example. And so there's a number of these large herpes-like DNA viruses that exist in our bodies for most of us. Cytomegalovirus is another one. Epstein-Barr virus is a major one. And generally, your T cells keep these guys, you can think of it as Pandora's box, keeps the lid shut by T cell suppression. And if you pull that suppression off, the top pops open and all the nasties fly out of Pandora's box, I think is a good way to think about these latent DNA viruses. And it was clear that was happening after the jab. It's one of the major, it appears now to be one of the major causes of the kind of short to intermediate term long COVID symptoms, particularly Epstein-Barr virus. So that's what I was referring to. Now, fast forward to yesterday or the day before, when Veritas dropped this third video from Dr. Walker, I assume now formerly Pfizer worldwide director of mRNA vaccine or mRNA strategies, in which he talks about the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis. What he's basically saying there is that Pfizer believes that the menstrual irregularities are really kind of the tip of the iceberg, and that this thing is damaging a fundamental aspect of your endocrine system. Your endocrine system controls your energy, it controls your sex drive, it controls all kinds of development, it controls your mental state, whether you're depressed or excited or whatever. It controls your digestion. I mean, your endocrine system is hugely important, and endocrine abnormalities can be associated with cardiac problems, and they are absolutely endocrine fluctuations impact on your immune function. So now we have, in addition to the huge laundry list that we already had of potential causes, in terms of the pathophysiology for why we're seeing these immunologic suppression phenotypes, particularly the more people get jabbed. But now we have another one, which is the damage to the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about politics instead of mindless drivel, check out our politics playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, watch our full episode playlist, all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.